Pretty busy day two, huh? The Vikings selected 3 players, and there's a lot to get into. So let's get into it here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On Vikings podcast, weekend edition. I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Locked On Vikings is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Day two is in the books. The Vikings are 3 players richer, and we got to talk about all 3 of them in depth, so let's get into it. And the day started. This is, by the way, this is a Saturday episode. I know this is a little out of the norm. We don't usually have this. Consider it my treat. Let's talk first about what the Vikings did at pick 34 from all the trading with the Lions yesterday. Listen to yesterday's show if you want that. The Vikings were blessed with the second pick in the second round. They traded this. The phone rang, as Kwesi put it. Well, the phone rings, you pick up, and apparently somebody in the Vikings organization has some relationship going back with somebody in the Green Bay Packers organization. That's right, the Vikings traded with another division rival, which is kind of wild. The trade itself was pick 34, where the Packers traded up. They took Christian Watson from NDSU, who I did not like. I had a third round grade on him. I've been joking with Packers fans that he's FCS Troy Williamson. I encourage you, whether you agree or not, to throw the same thing at them and see what they do. But so they trade up, and the Vikings get pick 53 and pick 59. They got 2 second rounders for 1 high second rounder. That's kind of insane. That is an insane trade for the Packers to make. I genuinely do not know how the Packers let that happen. That is a fleecing of seismic proportions. Packers fans should be irate. They should be demanding answers, because that is an insane trade. 2 second rounders for 1 second rounder. It's one thing. I have seen this kind of thing make a little sense to people in like the 6th round, where everybody's trade chart kind of views like day 3 picks differently. In the 6th round, you can see 1 6th rounder go for 2 6th rounders and arguments over who gets the better end of that deal. In the 2nd round, every second rounder has a pretty good chunk of value. Going 2 for 1 there is utterly insane. The Packers must have been really desperate for a wide receiver. And so I complained a lot yesterday about the division tax and how the Vikings didn't really charge the Lions the price I thought they should have charged them. They charged the Packers. Holy crap, trading with the Packers cost them that they were trading with a division rival. But they got up, they got their guys, so I guess it works out for them. The Vikings traded back to 59 and 53, but they didn't pick at 53. They picked at 42. They traded back up with the Colts. That trade was pick 53 and then our 3rd rounder 77 to the Colts for pick 42, a higher second rounder, 122, a 4th rounder, and then the Vikings also gave a 6th rounder in the deal. So essentially they kind of undid the Herndon trade as part of this, going from a 6th to a 4th, where the Herndon trade was a 4th to a 6th. And then they essentially then used a 3rd rounder to accomplish that, and then also move up a little bit in the 2nd round. So at pick 42, they selected Andrew Booth, who I had as like a top 25 player, maybe top 30 if you really press me. This is backflips. I'm stoked as hell to get Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth. To me, that rounds out the secondary. The secondary, they could use a guy on day 3 as like depth. But that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about like depth, and do we have the roster rounded out? Who's CB6? Those kinds of questions. Much lower octane questions than like who plays. So Andrew Booth plays. I think he runs away. He probably competes with Dantzler like for real. They probably do a camp competition, and I think Booth just runs away with it. There's also a little bit of medicals with Booth you should know about. He had some core surgery. He says that he'll be ready to play by OTAs, which are coming up in a couple weeks. Kwesi says, yeah, we're working with him on his rehab. We'll take it slow. We'll be careful. All that good stuff you're supposed to say. But it doesn't seem like it's going to put week 1 in jeopardy unless there's a setback or something we don't know about it. I've talked about Andrew Booth a lot in the pre-draft process. He was very much a guy we talked about a ton because he was one of the top corners in the draft. I had him CB5, and I was lower than most. Even I said he should be a first rounder. Getting him at 42 is a coup. But basically what you need to know about him, he's a very reckless and aggressive corner. He trusts his eyes and his instincts. His instincts are pretty good. They're not quite right often enough for me. But I would much rather have a guy that trusts his instincts and have to fix those instincts than have to give a guy instincts and also have to make him trust them. That's a shorter developmental path. And I think that he can be a starter right away. He's very physical. Very physical for a corner, to the point where it might get him in a little trouble. He's not as grabby as like a Kair Elam, where that's like the defining trait of him as a prospect. But there are some really fun highlights on Booth's tape where he'll, blow up a receiver that's trying to block him. He'll go make a great tackle. He really flies in and lays the wood in not a dissimilar way from Lewis Cine. If you want more detailed analysis, go listen to this Wednesday's episode where I talked about all the corners, and find Andrew Booth. It's in the second half of the second segment there. Go check that out. And I went into a little bit more detail and kind of explained how I thought about him. And you get it with me not knowing he's a Viking, so I'm not being a homer. And I didn't love him. I thought of him as a borderline first, second round pick, but at this point, at pick 42, the value is great. I love this, and I think for me, this defines the draft. Lewis Cine, Andrew Booth. I love that, and that's the most important thing that happens. Everything else is kind of gravy from there. They did pick other players, though. They picked at 59. They picked at 66. We will talk about that. But first, let me talk to you about Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed, durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to the fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use Locked On, promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, to get 50% off of 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for their best deal of the season. 50% off of 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses. Backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Moving on here with this day 2 recap, let's talk about the next guy. At pick 59, the Vikings took an awkward one. This one's going to be hard to talk about. It's Ed Ingram out of LSU at guard. If you have been begging for a guard for the last 5 years, this is the kind of guard you've probably been begging for on the field. He's very stout in pass protection. Pass protection is probably his premier trait, that he's very sound in pass protection. His footwork is fantastic. His handwork is fantastic. He's really good at using his hands, and he's also really good at not showing his hands too early. That a lot of young linemen will get their hands swiped away because they just throw themselves at you. His weight is really balanced. He doesn't get his weight out in front of his toes too often. He's pretty consistent about that. There's some time where we'll get to it. He's a very good lineman in pass protection. I'd say good but inconsistent in run blocking. He mauls pretty well. I'll circle back to his tape, but what we have to talk about before we get into that is his off-field. We'll go with troubling, off-field. It's very troubling. And I'll tell you about the incident and I'll tell you kind of how I feel about it, but this one kind of took the wind out of my sails after I was so jazzed on the Booth pick. It sort of put a big wet blanket on the night because it's a difficult thing to reconcile. So Ed Ingram, when he was 15 or 16, committed over like a year-long span, allegedly committed a series of sexual assaults against 2 victims that later accused him. And those accusations were all bundled up into one big charge that was pressed against him while he was in college at LSU. He was suspended from the program over this for a long time, for like a year, I think. And then ultimately he was indicted, but the charges were dropped. Those charges being dropped, we've talked about this a lot in the national space with like Deshaun Watson. Charges being dropped is not the same as an exoneration. That doesn't mean he didn't do it. It means it didn't go to trial. And that can happen for a number of reasons. I talked to a lawyer that I know about this that is familiar with this kind of stuff. A lot of times that can be because the victims themselves decide it's too traumatic and they don't want to pursue it anymore. They'd rather just move on with their lives. Sometimes it's because the testimony doesn't work for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because too much testimony has been recanted, and now the credibility of that victim they think is going to be too easy to attack in court, so they decide just to not go through with it anymore. Sometimes, there's a lot of reasons that can happen that doesn't necessarily mean the guy didn't do it. And I think crucially, Ed Ingram has never publicly denied these allegations unless it's in the court reports. But because this incident involved minors, we don't know anything. We can't look at those court reports, all sealed, lock and key. The state of Texas is going to keep that under. So unfortunately, we can't really do our own research and come up with a conclusion that we're comfortable with. We kind of just never get resolution on that. That's just what it is. He was accused, he was indicted, it was dropped, he was suspended, and then he was reinstated, and he missed a long part of his college career. According to the NCAA, that was punishment enough for him. The NFL probably doesn't go double jeopardy on that. So this incident isn't going to result in a suspension or anything like that. It was, 7-8 years ago. So when you think about kind of what you think of Ed Ingram, you also kind of have to think about how much and for how long do I want to hold a person accountable for a deeply, deeply awful thing that he probably did when he was 16? That's a really hard question, and I think everyone's answer to it needs to be their own personal one. I'm certainly not going to tell you what your answer to that question should be. For me, it's a pretty sick accusation. Like, it's really troubling. The accusation is that he crawled into the girl's bed and touched them inappropriately, escalating to more graphic versions of kind of similar things. It is the behavior of somebody who should know better than that at 16. And I'm really uncomfortable with him being a Viking. I'm uncomfortable rooting for him. If you're not, then that's fine. I'm not here to tell you what you should think about it. I am uncomfortable rooting for him. But as fans of the team, we didn't ask to have to weigh our Vikings fandom, which for some of us is, down to blood, right? We were born into it. For some of us, it's part of our identities. That's what fandom is. It's what fandom of anything is. Of a band, of a TV show, of a sports team, of a country. That's what anything is. And I don't think anybody should be asked to abandon that because of the behavior of that team. That's just not fair to a fan of the team. We didn't ask for this. We didn't do anything wrong. And so in a point, like, how dare the Vikings, put their fans in that situation, especially women that are fans of the Vikings. How dare they put women in that position? I couldn't imagine how much harder this would be if I were a woman. All that said, you are your own person with your own set of unique experiences, and however you reconcile this, I'm not going to judge you. For the Vikings themselves, as they were asked about it, it seems to me like they're mostly only concerned about it being an availability concern, which is pretty disappointing. They seem to only really care if he's going to miss other time for like a repeated incident or something like that. And they are very confident in their background work, they'll tell you. Kwesi was grilled pretty hard by the media, the beat journalists, especially Arif Hassan did a really good job in that press conference, kind of holding his feet to the fire on this. He eventually just sort of backed into the point where, look, we're just going to not answer any more questions about this. And we did our background on him. We feel confident in his character was his line, and that's that. So that's the thing about Ed Ingram that I think is really difficult to put aside. But if you can compartmentalize, let's do that for a moment. Let's talk about him on the field. So like I said, I think the thing that I like the most about him is his balance. And that he's really good at keeping his weight over his feet and not getting his weight out in front of his feet. A lot of young linemen will do that. They'll lunge, they'll kind of get their balance messed up. And that's how you can get push-pulled or you can get swam by like even decent defensive linemen can like really screw you on that. And he's really disciplined and he doesn't like take the cheese, if you will. And he doesn't do that with his hands either. So He's very good at that, and that's why he's so consistent in pass protection. I think he had like the highest PFF pass protection grade. I don't really care about that, but I do kind of happen to agree he's good at pass protection. The biggest concern for me, and he can move in space too. There are a lot of really good highlights of him pulling out and kicking out. The LSU ran more of a power scheme, so the fit's a little weird. And he'll have to learn a new scheme and new blocking techniques and stuff. So it might take some time to convert him there. But when he kicked out as a power like puller, you got to see him work in space. And I've seen him, there are clips of him combo blocking and stuff, and he's good at that. So I don't think it'll be a very difficult transition, though. Be prepared for it to maybe take some time. But he is really good in space, and he's a lot more nimble than he should be for his size. He's a good lineman. I think if it weren't for his off-field, I took him entirely off of my board, specifically and only because of his off-field. Like, that was the reason. And if it weren't for that, if you stripped that away, which you shouldn't, but if you did, he would be third round, probably high third round pick, and we took him at 59. It's maybe a moderate reach if you pressed me on it, but not one that I would really spend a lot of time complaining about. I think he runs away with the right guard job for whatever it's worth. He'll probably compete with like maybe Jesse Davis, and I think Jesse Davis probably starts out getting the first team reps, and I think that Ed Ingram can take over pretty quickly, assuming that his transition to a more zone-heavy scheme versus what LSU did is a smooth one, and that's a big assumption to make, but if that's the assumption, then that's the one. Let's move on to the last guy the Vikings picked in day 2, Brian Asamoah, linebacker out of Oklahoma. We will get to that. But first, let me talk to you about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It is absolutely delicious, covered in 100% chocolate. They come in their delicious Built Puffs flavor, which is like a marshmallowy one. It's got like a marshmallow churro one. They've got a key lime one. And then, of course, all their main series flavors like chocolate orange, chocolate raspberry, chocolate peanut butter, all the classics. Whatever you buy, go to built.com, enter promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15. You get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Let's move on to Brian Asamoah, the linebacker out of Oklahoma. Really wholesome moment. If you go watch his draft call, highly recommend that because he's Ghanaian and so is Kwesi. And really cool conversation there. It's very neat and cute. I love it. On the field, Brian Asamoah is a very fast and undersized linebacker. He's 226. That's really small for a linebacker. And that's why he's available in the third round. That's the whole deal of it. He's a coverage linebacker. He's very good in coverage, good instincts, good speed, a lot of range. People even call him he kind of looks like a beefed up box safety. And that is, I think, a good way to put him because he has the speed you would expect. If you put a beefed up box safety and lined him up at Mike, he can cover sideline to sideline like a high safety would. And Oklahoma really used that. And I think and this is a theme I've noticed with all the Vikings draft picks. He knows what he's looking at. There are examples on his tape at Oklahoma where he's the first guy reacting to like misdirection plays or whatever. He is very evasive. So when a lineman is coming at him, right, whatever lineman is assigned to blocking him for that play, he's very good at evading that guy, getting past him, not getting into an engagement at all. And he has a very similar style of getting past that. This is going to sound bizarre, but stick with me. As Aiden Hutchinson. And if you go listen to my edge rusher episode, one of my things with Aiden Hutchinson was like his whole deal is that he gets off of blocks before they start. And that's what made him the exciting second round pick. That he was very good. He had long arms and he would keep you off of him. And Asamoah does too. He has 80-inch wingspan. That's 93rd percentile. Very long arms, very good at keeping you off of him. You don't get to an engage at all. So you don't get to be a 300-pound guy blocking me with a 75-pound advantage. You don't get to come up to me. I'm just going to get past you, get under you, get around you, however. And he's got very good quickness and agility to do that. He's a very, very good athlete. Sort of like my opinion of Aiden Hutchinson. I don't know if that flies in the NFL because NFL linemen are a lot more agile. NFL linemen have the athleticism to be a lot more aggressive. They have the agility and the sort of change of direction that college linemen don't typically have. You know, if you're a lineman in the NFL, you're kind of a freak. You can move 300 pounds and you can change where 300 pounds is going. NFL or college linemen don't necessarily have that. So that kind of, well, I'll just keep you off of me. I know you can beat the crap out of me. I'll just keep you off of me. is going to be a lot harder to sustain. That said, he has a way to win against those blocks, right? It's not like Chaz Surratt, where the second a guy got within 2 feet of him, he was toast and he would maybe get embarrassed. Some of Chaz Surratt's lowlights, some of the worst college tape I've ever watched. But Asamoah, it's not nearly like that, right? He has a way to get around you. He has a way to kind of say, okay, once a lineman is locked into me, if he has the athleticism to catch up to me, I can still deploy what's basically a pass rushing move and get past you. And by the way, those same skills show up when he's blitzing as well. And that's really exciting, that he was a very, very good blitzer at Oklahoma. So sending him at the quarterback, he can do all that stuff. And you get a lot of versatility, and that's sort of been the name of the game here, right? Guys that can do multiple jobs, that's all really exciting. So he's fast, he's small, and that's sort of the deal. My comp for him, jokingly, I joked on Twitter, my comp for him is Metal Mario and Mario Kart, which if you're a Mario Kart fan, you know what that means. If you're not, it's basically that's the character in Mario Kart that goes very fast, but you have absolutely no control. He's just all go. He's very frenetic and tenacious. Urgency, I think, was a word that somebody on the Vikings used. Maybe it was Kwesi. It might have been somebody else. Urgent. There are a lot of urgent defenders. Booth, very urgent defender. Asamoah, very urgent. Lewis Seen, very urgent. They're guys that see what they see. They're pretty good at being right about it. They trigger and they go and they get it. This is very much, you're starting to see a vision for this defense sort of unfold itself with the draft and with the free agency signings, where you kind of want guys that see ball, go get ball, and you can play that style of defense where you just have 6 guys rallying around the ball. The second anybody gets slowed down and the second any of the rhythm gets disrupted, you just have all these guys swarming around like it's a hive of purple bees. So I don't hate the Asamoah pick. On my board, I had him as somebody I would take at 77, and they took him at 66. But to be fair about that, my methodology was thinking in terms of the picks the Vikings had. So when I say pick at 77, I really mean he's a third rounder, and they picked him in the third round. I'm totally fine with the value there. I don't think it's a reach or anything. I think that's about where he should have gone, give or take. So I'm fine with the Asamoah pick. My biggest critique is how often is he going to be on the field? Because he's the third linebacker. He probably can win that third linebacker job and be like the Nick Vigil replacement, kind of. Not stylistically like at all, but in terms of snap count. And he competes with, Chaz Surratt and Troy Dye and all those other. We got a lot of speedy, kind of smaller linebackers that are all going to compete for that job. And I think Asamoah is the one that has shown me the best play recognition on his college tape of those guys. Troy Dye converted safety, Chaz Surratt converted quarterback, Brian Asamoah actually plays the damn position. So I think he's got a leg up in that competition, but in reality in camp, they'll all compete and whoever has the best camp wins. And I think Asamoah just has a really good chance of winning that. But whoever gets that job, that's not a 3-down job. And at pick 66, I'm kind of hoping you get a little bit more than that. I mean, that's the second pick in the third round. I'm hoping you get a little bit more than a rotational guy at pick 66. And right now he's a rotation. Maybe someday he's an heir apparent to Jordan Hicks or Eric Kendricks, and he kind of takes over the job there. That would be a phenomenal outcome. But for the foreseeable future, he's kind of a guy that subs in like a 3-3-5 nickel or something like that. And the Vikings, I don't know, he's somebody, you bring him in on 3rd and 10s when Harrison Phillips comes off the field. He's the guy that comes on the field. If you were already in nickel and you need to take your run D tackle out, you bring in him and he's a coverage guy. He's very, very good in coverage. I probably undersold that a little bit. He's good. That's like the whole point of him, is that he's good in coverage. But when it comes to getting off of blocks, I want to see a little bit more ability to stack somebody up and shed them. Not just Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off, get around him. I want to see him actually take on and engage and win it. And too often I see him kind of get blown back. So that's Brian Asamoah. We talked about Ed Ingram, Andrew Booth. Tomorrow is day 3. They now have a 4th rounder with all that trading. They have pick 122. They got it from the Colts. They still have their 5th rounder, 2 of the 6th rounders, and a 7th rounder. So relatively normal day 3 from here, assuming there aren't any more trades, which there totally could be. So we'll be ready for anything, and I'll talk to you about it tomorrow here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Also check out Locked On NFL live show, live coverage of all this stuff. Doing great work over there. It's a really, really cool broadcast. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.